Today we're going to talk about tripods and landscape photography. Do we still need them with the advances of modern cameras these days, or should we just leave them at home? Tripods are sort of top of mind for me this week as I just recently returned from a trip to West Virginia where I worked with some people with their tripods and how to use them more efficiently and how they performed out in the field. As well as I just recently saw a social media post where someone was asking, do I even need a tripod for my photography because of the advances cameras have made with in-body image stabilization, or IBIS for short. So I thought it'd be helpful to talk about where tripods fit in for today's landscape photographer. So I'm going to talk about three major topics in this video today. First, what are some of the advances cameras have made recently that sort of leading people to think they may not need a tripod for their landscape photography? Second, what are some situations I think a tripod is still necessary in order to get the best results for your photographs? And finally, mistakes to avoid if you've decided you do want to take a tripod out into the field. Now this video is going to be more general in nature. I'm not going to talk about any specific tripods. I'll talk about some general brands, some general recommendations at the end, but this is not going to be a tripod review video. It's going to be more general about those camera setting advancements, about when a tripod can genuinely be useful out in the field, and then again, how to avoid mistakes I've made and mistakes I've seen other people make when they get their first tripod. So I think there's primarily been three advances in camera technology and post-processing software that have sort of led landscape photographers to consider not taking a tripod out in the field. Two of them are related to technical advances in the cameras themselves, and one is related to the post-processing software that has continued to advance as well. The first one is in-body image stabilization, with a lot of modern cameras featuring between 5 and 7 stops of image stabilization. And what that means is it allows you to hand hold the camera and be much more stable because the camera is making algorithmic adjustments to the sensor to give you that stable view. I've done a video on in-body image stabilization, and I will link to it down in the description below, but it really does help you take shots that you might not have otherwise normally been able to take. I recently got the Nikon Z5 II, and it boasts up to around 7 stops of image stabilization, and even in my review videos, I've commented on just how stable that camera is. In fact, when I am doing hand-holding, or if I'm using my telephoto and wanting to hand-hold instead of use a tripod, I've been grabbing the Z5 II because I've actually found that its image stabilization is noticeable in the field, and it really does let me take shots that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do without a tripod. So IBIS is certainly a factor in why I think more landscape photographers are considering leaving their tripod at home. The second factor is that the sensors used in our modern day cameras are much better at cleaner images at higher ISO than some of the previous cameras. It used to be you always wanted to shoot as close to ISO 100 as you could. ISO 400 you could probably work out, but much beyond that you started to get really worried about noise in your images, and you were going to want to get on a tripod so you could use longer shutter speeds to compensate for the lower ISOs. But as cameras have continued to advance, I think nothing of shooting at ISO 400. ISO 800 isn't that bad. All the way up to ISO 1600 and ISO 3200, depending on camera system, can do pretty good. So by allowing those higher ISOs, that allows you to use a faster shutter speed, again, sort of helping you move away from having to use a tripod for certain shots. And as we get to the third advancement that has helped us move away from tripods is you get the denoise algorithms in various post-processing software. We initially had tools like Topaz, where it had denoise algorithms that you could apply on a photo and sort of clean them up. Even Adobe has greatly advanced their denoise by adding in some AI, and their denoise features really impressive and can really clean up some pretty noisy files. So by the time you factor in all three of these components, it really has helped open the door that you can be much more flexible with your hand holding of your camera for your photographs. Those all contribute to why the tripod is not needed as nearly as often as it used to be. And I do photograph handheld myself. I've done some videos on how to do it more successfully, and it can be quite freeing to not lug a tripod around, or even if you bring a tripod with you, not to feel like you have to set it up for every single composition you're working through. It really can be freeing. The tripod, while I do think it can be a valuable tool, it is another tool that you need to set up, and it can slow you down and potentially, get in the way of your creativity. So the advancements we've seen in camera systems and post-processing software certainly open the door to more handheld landscape photography for those times you want to do it. But even despite these advances, I still feel like a tripod is a key piece of a landscape photographer's gear. There are just certain situations a tripod can help have a positive impact on your images or the techniques you're trying to use to capture your images. Let's take a look at some of those. There are still several landscape photography techniques that benefit from having a tripod out in the field, whether it be from increased image quality or just allowing you to have a little bit more creativity by being able to place your camera on a nice stable platform like a tripod. First, just general overall image quality when it comes to sharpness. IBIS is great, but it is moving the sensor in there and is using an algorithm to sort of stabilize your camera versus putting your camera on a nice stable tripod where it is set still and kept still. You have the potential to get just a little bit more sharpness. IBIS is great, my images look good, but if you really want to try to maximize sharpness and you're really concerned about it, getting your camera on a tripod is going to be a good step in the right direction. It's hard to beat an actual stable platform as compared to the algorithmic moving of the sensor inside the camera. And then there's certain techniques that benefit from having a stable platform. Think about exposure bracketing. So you're out there and you're trying to do some exposure bracketing, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 shots. Well, in those shots, you want your composition to remain exactly the same. And if you're trying to handhold those, your composition is going to shift a little bit. You can't stay perfectly still, and you'll lose some pixels because of that shift, and you have to try to auto-align and hope it can even auto-align. Whereas if you want to use exposure bracketing and get the camera up on a tripod, you're going to have the same composition. You can get the composition dialed in, you can take your shots with the different exposures, and when you merge them together, you're going to have a nice, clean, crisp merge to get that put all together to take advantage of being able to do exposure bracketing. Focus stacking is another one. When you're trying to get everything in focus from the foreground to the background and you're moving your focus point through the image. That is just easier when you're on a tripod because, again, similar to exposure bracketing, you get your camera set up there, get your composition dialed in, and you just move that focus point through. Now, I have seen some photographers, William Patino jumps to mind, who hand holds focus stacks. I've tried it. I've not had a whole lot of success with it. I am sure it's something you could practice and you could pull off. But to me, the tripod just makes that a little easier to do with more consistent results for me. So to me, a tripod plays in pretty significantly for focus stacking. Long exposures, again, are an area where having a tripod is helpful. Now, I've played with doing some waterfall shots with just using IBIS, and I've had some reasonable results when the water's moving fast and when I've got the right focal distance. But if you're looking at a slower waterfall, or you're really trying to get a stream of water leading through the frame, you really aren't going to be able to handhold that because even with IBIS, you're just not going to be able to get a long enough exposure to get that look you want. But when you're on a tripod, you have complete flexibility around the length of time the shutter stays open in order to get that creative effect you want with your water. So again, I think a tripod is very helpful for certain long exposure images. Think about clouds moving through the sky. The other day, I was practicing shooting clouds moving over this big cliff face out in West Virginia. And I was running like 10 stop filters and trying to get nice long exposures that were 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 16 seconds long. And even with in-body image stabilization, I just cannot handhold it that long. The clouds would certainly blur, but the cliffs would also, they would be blurry too. So for those super long exposure images, a tripod is super helpful in order to get those exposures that you want and have the rocks and the structured elements nice and crisp and sharp and your water or your clouds blurred from the movement. And of course, that ties over to some of the blue hour work, just before the sun comes up or just after the sun goes down. You're getting in the realm where you're either going to have to shoot really high ISOs or you're going to have longer exposures in order to get the scenes that you want. Again, I think it's just a little easier for those types of light to use a tripod where you have complete flexibility with what you want to do with your shutter speed. Yes, I get it. The high ISO performance is getting much better, but if you really want to dial in and you know you're going to be doing a lot of blue hour work, I feel like a tripod would help you with that and be a necessary part of your kit. For me, a tripod sort of brings with it intentional composition, whether it be me wanting to think a little more about my composition just so I don't have to set up my tripod over and over and over, but I'm able to set it up, get it set, and it just makes me a little more intentional in the field. Just the process of getting the tripod set up makes me think more intentionally when I'm evaluating a scene. And then once I have the camera on, I'm fine to make small micro adjustments to that composition. And I don't have to worry about completely losing it because I'm sitting at a different height, or I stood, or I slouched, or I turned a little bit this way or a little bit that way. It can be much harder to replicate a composition that you like. Whereas once I have the camera up on a tripod, I can make those subtle adjustments. I use a geared head with my tripod. I can make very minute adjustments to the left and to the right and dip down and move up Those are just all once you're on a tripod, you can slow down, you can think. I don't have to think about holding the camera steady. I can instead focus on my composition on the back of the camera. So for me, a tripod brings a certain amount of intentional composition with it, and I think that can be valuable. I don't think you have to use it all the time. I don't think you have to feel like you're tethered to a tripod, but I do think that intentionality can be very useful to come away with compelling compositions. And then finally, having a tripod can help you compose for the light or condition that you expect to happen. I frequently do this at sunrise or sunset, where I usually go out with 2 cameras and I set one camera up for the sunrise or the sunset shot. You know, the grand wide scene. I spend my time dialing in my composition. It's often done when the light is not great, either it's too dark or the sun is still high, but I get my composition set up and established on the tripod, and then I can sort of walk away from it and wait for the light to move, capture various shots, and I've got the composition I want. I'm really just sort of waiting for the light to do something that is particularly interesting. So for me, I really like being able to do that. Set that tripod up, get my composition, and just sort of watch the evening or the morning unfold. Now, like I said, I tend to take 2 cameras, so with my second camera body, I am out there shooting handheld. I enjoy that. That's where I'm looking for different scenes, how the light comes across a ridge, how it backlights a tree, any number of things like that. And that is the luxury of having 2 camera bodies. Sort of lets me have the best of both worlds. The tripod to get the grand scene that I'm just waiting for the light to do something that I think is photograph worthy, and in the meantime I use the handheld where the IBIS helps, where the high ISO ability helps, and knowing I can have some nice denoise tools helps. So I like having both of them, but I don't think I'd want to give up my tripod for those types of shots. So because of those reasons, that's why I think a good tripod is an essential part of a landscape photographer's toolkit, despite the advances that modern camera systems have made and the denoise options that we have in various post-processing software. So you've made it to this point and you've decided the tripod does belong in your gear kit for your landscape photography. What I want to talk about now is some mistakes that I see made frequently when either buying your first tripod, maybe even upgrading that first tripod before you get to the point where you get a quality tripod. And these are mistakes I've made myself. I've been down this road. I've received the same advice I'm about to give you when it comes to getting a tripod, and I ignored that advice and I made these same mistakes and worked through the series. And those mistakes are getting a cheap tripod. For some reason, when you're new to landscape photography or you're just trying to get used to tripods, you're like, I'm going to get an inexpensive tripod just to try it out and see if I like it. And you start with that inexpensive tripod. For me, it was actually a tripod that my father had handed down to me. And it was a really inexpensive tripod, and it was a little bit clunky, and it was a little bit loose, and yes, technically it was a tripod, but it did not hold the camera very stable. So from there, I went off and bought another tripod, and from there I bumped up just a little bit, but I still didn't move into nice tripod territory. And that tripod, though its legs felt sturdier and everything like that, it had a center column on it that would do a 90-degree tilt to it, so you could sort of extend it out like this, so like perpendicular, and that center column was always loose. I literally would take little business cards and shove them in there to try to get it to be stable. So there it was. I'd spent, I don't know, $240, $230 on a tripod, and it was still not a stable system. Just wasn't a great tripod. From there, I upgraded to a different tripod that I thought would be a little better. Spent about the same as the other tripod that had the weird center column on it. And it did feel sturdier, and it actually does do fairly well, but it's a heavy tripod, just a little bit clunky. So it wasn't too bad of a step in the right direction, but it still wasn't right where I needed to be. And it was a little bit clunky when I used it. And eventually I fell into much more quality tripods. These days I use FLM tripods, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I got into that price point where the tripod legs were sturdy, everything was nice and efficient to use on it, and it gave me a stable platform that I enjoyed using out in the field. And it's just really amazing how big of a difference it can make. I've just seen so many people with inexpensive tripods where they're putting these big expensive cameras on top of them, and you can watch the tripod wiggle because they're just not sturdy enough. There's one case I saw someone, in order to get the camera height they needed, they'd have to extend the legs completely out, and they were small, thin legs. And so then they'd have to raise the center column just to get it up, around chest level. And then as soon as they touched the button, even if we put a delay or a self-timer on, you could watch the camera shake. It just was not a stable platform. It really wasn't helping their photography much. They would have been much better off to have invested in a higher quality tripod. The other thing about inexpensive tripods is they're just not efficient. I've used lots of different tripods. Some of them I've received for review, and I've talked about them, but they just like, for example, the twist locks on them. Sometimes it's a half a turn to get them tight. Sometimes it almost feels like you're giving the whole full turn. And if you get them turned part way, sometimes the leg slides real easily. Other times you have to loosen it even more. There's just no consistency to it. Whereas with my nicer FLM tripods, if I give my twist grip a quarter turn, it's loose. I can move it. It never fights me. I give it another quarter turn and it's tight. They're just so much faster and more efficient to use in the field. They just sort of get out of your way. Whereas with the more expensive tripods, I see so many people, myself included when I was using them, you just have to sort of fight that tripod to get the legs tightened up, to get the ball head tightened up. All of those things contribute to making your job harder in the field, and it can just sort of take the will to be creative away. Whereas if the tripod functions as an extension of yourself through being well machined and well engineered, it just sort of gets out of your way. It just opens and closes as you expect. It's easy to adjust. Everything like that. So that's where the inexpensive tripods sort of get you, is that they're just make you generally inefficient in the field in addition to not really providing a stable platform for you. So what should you look for in a tripod? Well, some of it's a little bit about price. If you're spending $100 or $200 on a tripod, you're probably knowing right out of the gate you're not really into the ballpark of where you want to be. A decent tripod is probably going to be upwards of upper 300s, $400, $500, $600. You can spend way more on that, but the recommendations I'm going to make for general brands, you really don't have to spend that much, though they are out there. The Really Right Stuffs, the Gitsos, those tripods, will get into the four-figure territory and will meet these requirements, but I think there's other ways to get there if you want to find that nice quality to price ratio, which we'll talk about. Things I tend to look for is I look for materials. I like a carbon fiber tripod. I talked about the one tripod I bought that wasn't too bad stability-wise, but it was heavy. I hated to put it on my pack because if I was going to hike very far at all, I think the thing with the head weighed close to 4.5 pounds, something like that. It's just a heavy tripod, which again contributes to not having the energy to be creative when you get to where you're going. Carbon fiber legs can help with that. They're both stiff and they're lightweight, so I like to look for a carbon fiber leg. When it comes to the locks, I prefer twist locks, but keep in mind just because it has twist locks doesn't mean it's quality. Ideally, you want to get your hands on them so that you can tell, are these well-machined twist locks? Do they consistently take a quarter to a half turn to loosen and to tighten? I think that's a big deal in order to be efficient in the field. It's super easy to open a tripod when it consistently only needs a quarter to half turn to open or close or anything like that. So I like twist locks. With that said, there's people that use flip locks, and I think as long as you're in flip locks that are quality, and the only way you can really tell is just play with them. Flip them. Do they consistently open, close, same tightness? Do they need any kind of finicky adjustment? If you really like flip locks, that's okay. I'm not trying to deter you from flip locks. I have found myself gravitating towards twist locks though, and that's what's on my tripods. For height, you typically want to be able to get to at least eye level. I have a couple different FLM tripods. One of them is my travel tripod, and I can get it to just right about eye level, but I have no leg extension left, which can be a bit of a downside when I'm on super uneven terrain, because sometimes on uneven terrain, it's nice to be able to really extend the leg to help get the platform straight. The other tripod I carry is also an FLM, but it's got longer legs on it, and it can actually get above my head, even without using a center column, and it can get above my head. I actually have to flip the tilt screen down in order to see what I'm composing. So you want to try to be able to at least get to eye level. Center columns, I've done a video on center columns. I do not use tripods with center columns anymore. I would recommend you probably want to have a tripod that can get to eye level or real close to it without using the center column, because to me, not all center columns are bad, but I don't think I want to be in a position where I have to use the center column. I want it to be more there for small adjustments, and I want to be able to maximize its stability by not having to extend it and still be at a comfortable height. But again, center columns, I've done a video, I'll link to it in the description below. You can determine whether you want one or not. They come with some conveniences, come with some cons, just be aware of them, you can go from there. They do make tripods, I think, that have good stability even if they're using a center column. I will say an inexpensive tripod with a center column is probably going to be very unstable as soon as you start extending that center column. Now for this video, I'm specifically focusing in on the tripod itself and not so much the ball head or the geared head or anything like that where the camera attaches to and how you make your adjustments at the top. But don't forget that when you're picking out a tripod. If you get a nice set of tripod legs but then put a cheap ball head on it, you'll run into similar frustrations where it doesn't tighten down well or it's inconsistent with how it tightens down, things like that. So don't overlook getting a good quality ball head. I can link to a couple that I've used down in the description below to much success, ranging in price from about $100 US to about $300 US. nice ball heads, nice and stable, that I would recommend. I'm using geared heads these days, give you much more precision when you're making composition adjustments, but I don't want to dive too far into that. We can do another video on ball heads and geared heads in the future, but don't cheap out on the ball head or geared head. And if you're getting a tripod that comes with one, try to make sure it's coming with one that's at least reasonably decent, because you can get this great set of tripod legs and lose it all if you have a poor quality ball head or a geared head. Again, a lot of this contributes to ease of use. Be wary of gimmicks. I've seen some prominent tripod manufacturers who market themselves as a high-quality tripod that just have some gimmicks that I think make them clunky to use and inefficient to use in the field. Not only should the tripod provide you a stable base, it should be easy to use in the field, because it's another tool that's out there that you're going to have to manipulate and use in order to take your picture. So you want it to be as easy as possible. The tool helps your photography and doesn't get in the way of your photography and causing frustration. So like I said, those are some of the things I look for. What about brands? Like I said, this is not going to be a gear review video, but I've mentioned a couple times I use FLM tripods. To me, they are the pinnacle of tripods. They have a attractive price point, and they're very high quality. I've used my CP30 S4 tripod for 4 years now. I think I'm starting to lose count. And it's the one I fly with, so it's been back and forth across the United States, all sorts of conditions, and it's as good as new. It functions great. I've been using my CP30 L4, which is a taller tripod, pretty much identical to the S4, just it's got longer legs so it can go taller. I use it whenever I'm driving someplace. It's my main tripod. It too, it's a joy to use. It's easy to use, it's flexible, it's easy, it stays out of my way, provides a very stable base. I happened to compare it at the workshop. I had a person that had a lesser expensive tripod, the one where you could see the camera shake on it. And it was like they didn't have the remote shutter release, and so we're going to have to use a timer. And even with the timer, we were still seeing some shake. So I got my tripod out and set it up, and it was just a world of difference. You could press the button, and it was still stable. So I'm a big fan of FLM tripods. They are probably my preferred choice. If you're looking for something else to look at besides FLM, just because you like to compare and contrast, I'd recommend taking a look at Leofoto tripods. I tend towards the Ranger series of tripods. I actually have not used a Leofoto tripod, but I have several photographer friends that do use Leofoto tripods. They've always spoken highly of them, and from times I've gotten to touch them, hold them, and look at them in the field, they seem like they're pretty decent, and they have a wide selection of various tripods. Like I said, I gravitate towards the Ranger series. They look like a nice solid series. They do have some that will come with a ball head. I think the ball head is reasonable. You'll end up in a good package for a reasonable price. Both FLM and Leofoto do sales, so around the typical holiday sales, and not just Black Friday, Christmas holiday sales, but like Labor Day sales, Memorial Day sales, 4th of July sales. Keep an eye on their sites. You can usually get, a discount off of them, anything between 10 and 20%, depending on time of year. But those are probably the two big brands I recommend. There are those others I mentioned out there, Really Right Stuff. I mean, great tripods. They're great, but they're expensive. So when it comes to the price to quality ratio, I just feel like I'm not going to knock the quality of a Really Right Stuff tripod. They're great tripods. But when you think about the price, I'd really rather go for an FLM tripod or a Leofoto for that. Same with Gitzo tripods, similar to that. So there are tripods to be had. You're probably going to be getting up into their upper 300s, $400, $500, $600, but it'll be a tripod that lasts you for a long, long time, and it won't impact the quality of your images. And like I said, I know it's hard. You're going to hear this. I ignored this advice when I got it, and I bought through that series of tripods from the very inexpensive, slightly more expensive, to finally getting to where I am at today. But like I said, it can really have a big benefit to your photography, and make sure you're out there with some quality gear that helps complement your photography and not frustrate you. So yes, though camera technology will continue to advance, with IBIS getting more and more impressive almost every camera release, and better performance at high ISOs from the cameras, paired with post-processing software that help clean up noise from those higher ISOs if you push it just a little too far. The ability to shoot handheld is better than ever. And I do encourage you to shoot handheld, but I still feel that a tripod is a key component for a landscape photographer, and is needed for those specific landscape photography techniques, or even if you needed to just sort of slow down a little bit and be patient in the field. The act of setting up a tripod to me feels like a deliberate motion, a deliberate step that helps me improve my compositions in the long run, just through the process of setting it up and thinking about my composition a little more in depth than moving from place to place to place with handheld shots. So if you already have a tripod, but you find it frustrates you more than it complements your photography, it may mean it's time to upgrade your tripod into something that's a little more stable and a little more efficient to use in the field, so it helps your photography and doesn't hinder you. So what kind of tripod do you use? Let me know down in the comments below. Was it an inexpensive tripod and you're happy with it? And an inexpensive tripod and you're looking to upgrade? What brand, what model do you use? Let's hear about it down in the comments below. I'd be curious to hear. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Like I said, tripods were top of mind between getting back from a workshop and some social media posts that I've read recently about whether tripods were needed for landscape photography. It just all sort of seemed to mesh well together. I'll link to a couple other videos you might find interesting right here. And thank you for watching.